And so your assessment at the time was don't take any measures and let affordability become an issue?
Well, not at all. I mean, I think we've acted quite
Recently, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have announced they're going to be creating more housing on federal land, but making them leasehold. This has stirred up a lot of emotions here in Canada. And what we've got here today is Vasi Kapelos of CTV absolutely destroying Mark Miller, Justin Trudeau's Minister of Immigration, as he's a bonehead. He really is. She comes armed with all of the facts. She's not even having to look at a piece of paper. She's just got them right on the top of her head, and she just keeps calling this guy one after the other. So let's jump into this.
I want to start off and ask you what the objective of these changes are, particularly with the temporary foreign worker program. Is it, for example, to address remarkably low youth employment rates? Is it more broad than that? Like, when this is fully realized, what is the goal?
Well, it is broader than that. We've seen recent youth unemployment rates jump. Earlier on this year, I announced the reduction of temporary workers in this country from 7% to 5%. What that looks like is a lot different than just temporary foreign workers. Temporary foreign workers are a very small part of that pie chart. International students, the postgraduate work permits that come with them, the humanitarian efforts that we've deployed to welcome Ukrainians here, they all form part of that category. So you can't just send people back to Ukraine and say this is all solved. We have to actually do this in a surgical way that makes sense for Canadians, but also makes sense for the economy. In the temporary foreign worker space, people working in the agricultural sector, transformation, in Tim Hortons, we've seen an overheating that needs to be adjusted ever since the end of COVID. And that's something I think every Canadian expects us to do. Those numbers do affect affordability, and not all those people can become permanent residents. So,
I mean, if you want to bring in all these Ukrainians, then why not just limit immigration to equalize the numbers, not just stack it on top? There's solutions to this. It's either he's an idiot or they have a plan to keep the immigration high, the housing prices high. But we know this because Justin Trudeau has admitted he wants to keep the real estate values high as it's, people's nest egg. He said it in that one radio interview. And just to touch on what Mark Miller was just saying there about temporary foreign workers, he said it was a very small percentage. I mean, it's 119,000 here in 2022. So that's not a small number. That's quite literally half of all the homes that Canadian builders build in a single year. And now all these people aren't going to stay, but some of them, a lot of them want to stay. So they could be taking up a third of the houses being built in Canada just from this one sector here, which is the smallest amount of people, the smallest group coming in.
The announcements that we made today, that Minister Boissonnault made today, are sort of a smart reflection of what we need to do to ramp that down back to what looks like pre-pandemic levels. It isn't the end of the story. Getting from 7% of the population to 5% is a much more significant step than that. I still have adjustments to make in the international student program. I made some significant ones in January, but it's part of a total package that we are continuing to deploy. Most measures of which will be out by the fall. The Bank of Canada said that the measures that we've taken to date are not sufficient to getting to those goals, but there are initial ones that I will announce. I took one 2 weeks ago to prevent people with labor market impact assessments that come here on visas from getting jobs. If people are here to visit, they shouldn't be working. So that's sort of something.
People that visit shouldn't be stealing cars too, but you guys don't seem to do anything about that. I mean, these guys are acting like the Bank of Canada told them, so now they're making some changes. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand what's going on here. You need to make changes years ago, quite literally 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Some of the measures that we'll be announcing, we have announced and we'll be announcing again in the fall.
You demarcated the end of COVID, right, as a sort of a point at which things started to accelerate. Is it fair of Canadians to ask now, if you're undoing a lot of that, why the undoing didn't start earlier? Because, for example, if you look at temporary residents who hold work permits, that number has increased by 150% over 2 years. It was 60%, not just low wage, I'm speaking more broadly. It was up 60% last July, year over year. Why did your government wait until just this January to start addressing one stream of it and now to address the rest of it? And could you not have addressed things earlier in order to mitigate some of the issues your Canadians are now dealing with?
I'd say 2020 hindsight is always something we can indulge in. As a thoughtful government, you always have to reflect of what you could have done faster, what you should.
A thoughtful government? Did he say that? This guy, they are the worst government we've ever had in Canada.
Should do, what you shouldn't do. I'd simply say this, the labor shortages that we saw even a year ago are no longer there. Markets are contracting, labor markets are contracting, and there's no longer the needs for the people that we were bringing in those amounts to be here or to come to Canada. That's just reality, and I think everyone expects governments to adjust.
But did the need exist a year ago? Are you asserting that it did?
It's very possible in some areas it did. I think now it's quite obvious that we do have to adjust.
She's totally calling him on his bullcrap. He knows it too.
As a minister, I have a responsibility to look forward and figure out what we need to do next to make sure that we have a number of temporary workers here that make sense for addressing affordability, for addressing the needs. But there's also the risk of over-adjusting and damaging the economy. The International Monetary Fund has said quite clearly that immigration has been a huge fuel in making sure that we didn't plunge into a recession like other countries in our situation. And there has been some benefits that the Bank of Canada has clearly highlighted, with some challenges that have come with it in and around housing.
He's trying to dig himself out of this hole. It's not working.
In and around affordability. And Canadians, as we've heard quite clearly over the course of the last year, have asked us to make some adjustments, and that's what we're doing. And we're doing, I think, so in a thoughtful fashion.
And I do respect the fact that you're talking about, you don't want to overshoot, essentially, that not everything is static. It hasn't been necessarily what it was a year ago. But the Canadian press, I remember a number of months ago, reported that your predecessor received a briefing 2 years ago in which it was clearly outlined that both the temporary and permanent stream would have a salient impact on affordability. You didn't do anything. I have to challenge you on that. Like, you didn't do anything for at least a year after that. It's like you kind of turned a blind eye. Is there a reason for that?
Well, look, I've read those memos assiduously.
Just to be clear, his predecessor was the failed immigration minister, Sean Fraser, who's now the housing minister. These guys are both losers and should not be in government.
Pretty much every day, we expect the public service to give us pros, cons of what impacts any measure that we take could generate. Those are risks that we take, and I think Canadians should see them and judge us for them. But there are also risks in not taking those decisions and not taking those, plunging into a recession, a real concern that would affect all Canadians. Currently now with rising interest rates, it's obvious that we do have to make a number of adjustments that economists are looking at and expecting us to make in terms of changes.
Is this guy really suggesting that we would have plunged into a recession if they didn't bring in a zillion people from India to fill up all the fast food jobs? Like, this is unbelievable. This guy it's like diarrhea just comes out of his mouth. There's nothing intelligent that's ever said by this man.
But sort of picking and choosing little things out of memos that you hear from the public service, I don't think is a necessarily helpful exercise. We expect the best advice from public servants. That's advice that was given in a memo, but they've also given us advice of the risks in not taking those measures as well.
And so your assessment at the time was don't take any measures and let affordability become an issue?
Well, not at all. I mean, I think we've acted quite aggressively on affordability. I mean, if we didn't have...
Canadians don't feel that at all.
Well, look, we certainly hear at the doors from Canadians what they're feeling. Obviously, Canadians look to governments to be responsible for decisions that have been taken. There's also a risk in not taking those decisions. If we had a labor market that was contracted in a recession, I think if you're looking at revisionist history, we could have gone through one, even two recessions, and I don't think Canadians would have wanted that either.
On the broader picture of immigration levels, today I thought it was very interesting that the Prime Minister did not close the door to changes to the permanent stream, right? And that is something that under your government has been a very specific policy measure. We're now at about 500,000 going to be. And the last time we spoke to you about this issue, you said it would stay, the latest plan showed that level staying there for the next 2 years. Can you expand on what kind of things your government is considering? Are you considering, very bluntly, a reduction in permanent immigration?
Well, we're looking at a number of options. When I paused the levels last year, it was with an undertaking to talk to Canadians and see what those levels look like or should be. There has been significant growth, I think, for good reason in the last few years. That economic growth, again, has been indispensable in making sure that the gross domestic product of the country has grown, that the
You're propping up the GDP by just bringing in more people. That doesn't actually increase the GDP of the country. It's false propping it up, just like how they use the Canada Pension Plan in their numbers against the other G7 or the OECD numbers. While it's good for us Canadians to vent our opinions, these numbers of immigration should be based on facts. The amount of people a community, the country can support, not based off of opinions. He's basically admitting that they're not going to be reducing the permanent immigration numbers, but they are reducing the temporary foreign worker numbers because they got criticized, not because they looked and saw that every single aspect that gets affected by this, whether it's the hospitals, the schools, the housing prices, housing supply, everything is breaking. They based it off of getting criticized, not doing what is best for this country. What else would you expect from these boneheads, though? They are just, they're unbelievable is what they are.
indispensable in making sure that the gross domestic product of the country has grown, that the entrance into the workforce, all driven by immigration, was assured. But now it's time to take a look at them and put real options on the table for the Prime Minister and for other cabinet ministers to look at, and not cosmetic changes simply to deal with public opinion. Real significant change to make sure that we have an immigration.
What does that mean? What does significant
you'll see
change
when we announce the levels. It's not something I would announce publicly, particularly without having had that discussed in cabinet. It has not had the full, robust cabinet discussion that is due to it. And I expect to hear from my cabinet colleagues who are sometimes of different positions and views as to what the immigration levels of the country look like. So when I say all options are on the table, there will be considerations about whether we reduce, what type of immigration that we are supporting. 60% of our immigration is economically driven. That is probably unprecedented with countries that we compare ourselves to. But we have to see if we've done this in the right way, and if that growth merits to continue, needs to be paused or even reduced.
Can we throw out this Liberal government? Is that on the table too? Just take a look at another chart here. We've got the immigration numbers in Canada from 2000 to 2023, so last year. And I mean, you can see here just this immediate spike. If you look, Trudeau got into power right there. And the first year, you can see just bumped right up to 323,000. Harper's last year was 240,000. And as I mentioned before, in multiple videos, the builders of Canada typically build around 250,000 homes, which leaves us at a slight deficit with temporary foreign workers and all that. But those numbers were a lot lower before. So Trudeau gets in, starts bringing numbers up. We have the world event. Then he's just like, let's rip the doors off and let everyone in here. We got to get more car thieves in this country. And that's where we're at today with these 500,000.
Why is that the conversation happening right now? And I ask with respect specifically to permanent, because every interview I've conducted with you or the housing minister over the last year, you have been very insistent that what was driving the ills associated with immigration was on the temporary side of things. And I even remember in January asking you this question about the permanent stream, and you said like questions in that, you were kind of hearing a lot of questions in that area, and some of them had undertones of racism. Like that is the way that your government pushed back against questions about permanent residency. And now at one of the most politically vulnerable times for your party, you're willing to look at cutting those numbers. Is that why?
Well, no.
I fully support what Vasi just said there. Even for me on here saying we don't want all this mass immigration, we still support immigration. We want people coming in who build up our country, the engineers, the doctors, the mechanics, the plumbers, but we don't want the car thieves. We don't want the street goons that Justin Trudeau is bringing in. For someone even like me to say, oh, let's bring down the immigration, it's crushing our country, people come at me like I'm some sort of R-word person. That's ridiculous. I'm a patriot of this country, of Canada. I want this country to be the best for everyone here. This is an amazing country. This was an amazing country until Trudeau screwed it up. But we can get it back, but we got to get these fools out of power. And we got to get rid of this nonsense, this woke kind of wording that is going along with this.
Oh, look, I'm not going to presume that racism doesn't exist, but there are legitimate views within Canadian society of people I would never think of calling
Could your
racist.
Government have been more entertaining to those views previously?
Well, I think we should always be open to these points of views. The conversations that I have, for example, around the Easter table, Christmas table, they're different views. Some people have a different view on immigration than I do. This is a country that has largely benefited and built an amazing consensus around immigration. But again, we're hearing from different parts of Canada, different even people in my own family that have different.
Somebody told him off in his own family at one of these dinners. That is what there's no way you'd use that example as just a random example unless you didn't have Uncle Bill come in and say, hey, Mark, you're screwing our country here with all this immigration. Can you turn down the knob here a bit? We need to turn down the faucet or turn off the faucet, not try to make the bathtub bigger.
Different views on immigration. I think we owe it as a responsible government to listen to them, even if we don't.
Did you not owe it a year ago or a year and a half ago when those levels were hitting 450,000, 500,000?
Well, they haven't hit 500,000. This year we will be at 485. There has been some aggressive growth, I think with good reason. And those people are productive members of the economy, productive members of society. But I think as a responsible country in the current context that we're facing, we have to look at those levels and say, do we continue along those lines? Or do we look at it and say, where can we best rationalize things? Where can we have a sustainable level within the levels that we see with the other countries of the OECD? And have a conversation that's devoid of racism, but also reflective of what different people are thinking. Those people from diasporas that we brought in, but also Canadians that have been here perhaps a little longer. And I think that is what that's what Canadians expect to hear.
And when's that?
So he basically said productive members of society. He's talking about permanent immigrants coming in. And we just had a story like, what was it, a week ago, of a person from the Middle East who has a video of himself removing someone's, popping someone's top with a sharp metal thing. The free speech suppression here is absolutely ridiculous. I wish I could just talk normally. You guys know what I'm talking about. A large thing you use to cut your bread or your cheese in your kitchen. Popped a guy's top with that. It was filmed on video. Given full citizenship in Canada. Does he not understand how his words sound when this happened quite literally like a week and a half ago? And then he's talking about how, oh, it's worked well. We brought in a lot of great people. That guy and his son nearly kaboom-boomed Toronto with their planned event.
But also Canadians that have been here perhaps a little longer. And I think that is what that's what Canadians expect to hear.
And when's that decision coming? Will that be in the report coming this fall? Like, you'll put out another plan?
So when I announced every year we announce the levels and I deposit a report in front of Parliament, what I've done this year, contrary to other years, is to fold in the temporary levels, which often does get confused with the permanent levels, and often we get criticized for not integrating the temporary levels, which have jumped in the past year. And I think one of the reasons we focus
past 2 years.
One of the reasons that we focus so heavily on temporary migration is because of the significant jumps that we've seen in the student cohorts, in the postgraduate work permit cohorts, and saying that certainly needs to get it under control. It's been overheated, but we're not excluding other areas as well.
Do you take responsibility for overseeing the system, just final question, that did get overheated? I mean, the permanent levels you set, the temporary levels you did not impose a cap on until this year.
Well, I think every minister needs to take responsibility for the files they're in. They also need to take the responsibility to make the same choices and not remain dogmatic to any particular view in society. And I think that's the responsibility I have. And in the next year, I think Canadians expect us to continue to take aggressive action where they think it makes sense for the economy and their lives.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Minister, I appreciate.
So Vasi came locked and loaded with all the facts. She doesn't even need a cheat sheet. She's got them in her head. So she just said the last 2 years, she corrected him. Well, you can see here, this is 2022 here. And the numbers were the same, if not higher, in 2023. So she's right. The last 2 years was this significant jump here. So these Liberals at this point should know they can't try to slip something past Vasi. She's on it. The way that Mark Miller's talking in this video too, talking about robust conversations in the caucus, blah, blah, blah. It basically makes it sound like he has to run it through the caucus and he's got to get, his Papa Trudeau to put the stamp on it and wipe his bum. And he's not really calling the shots of anything here. It doesn't seem like he's really got control of his department. Taking a look at the comments here, Sean Fraser was one of the worst immigration minister Canada ever had. That is true. What have you done to our country? Shame on you. We have to do better. No, you need to resign. Worst PM and government ever. Yet another clueless Liberal. This guy's pathetic. He should resign or be fired. Appreciate the reporter pushing him for answers. Really, 500k new immigrants a year with 0 new doctors because they need to redo their student studies was a bad idea. We have a lot of skilled people in Canada, but they can't use their skills here because the Liberals have such a bad system of allowing one to transfer those skills, even from countries that are Western countries, like a doctor in the UK coming over to Canada. I want a proactive government, not a reactive one. Yeah, the Trudeau Liberals are reactive to criticism, basically what's hurting their polling numbers. That's all they care about. Not going to vote Liberal next election or ever again. Why is this dude so out of breath? Panic attack from being questioned, knowing his clown posse have ruined the country. Mark Miller is just as bad as Sean Fraser. Sean Fraser announcing just the other day that they're putting in this leasehold program, 99-year lease. They're going to build more government housing. It just makes the government in control of your house. It's ridiculous. Just to break this down a little bit, if you have a 99-year lease, which is typically government lease, but it can be, say, from First Nations, they can lease out, do these 99-year lease. You don't own the land if you buy that house. You just own the house on the land. And what happens is after 99 years, if they don't want to renew that lease, then you lose your house. They just take it back. If you look historically, basically after the Second World boom event that happened 70 years ago, there's a big influx of making babies, and then they started making these leasehold properties more popular. A lot of those were 99-year lease, and now a lot of those only have like 30 years left, 40 years left, 50, 60 years left. So if you look at a lot of properties that have that today, they're only 30 to 60 years left. So you're really taking a gamble by getting one of those. I know there's a bunch that wrap around False Creek in downtown Vancouver. There's some here on Vancouver Island, some new ones that were opened up by First Nations that are 99-year lease. Some people are selling their houses and then buying one on First Nations land and getting that 99-year lease, because the value is always less on a leasehold land because you don't own the land. But if you're already 50, 60, 70 years old and you sell a house that's freehold and you still have a mortgage, you'll often be making, in today's market, a couple $100,000 extra just trading up for the same sort of house, but onto a leasehold land. You can pay off your mortgage, live mortgage free. So some people are doing that. While that's good for the person in the short term, for your kids, your great grandkids, that's not as good in the long term. Often a lot of those leasehold lands, though, they will renew them. But sometimes if they want to build a highway through there or whatever else, then they'll say no, and then it becomes a mess, because then you'll essentially lose that land, that lease, which means you lose your house. And really the worst thing to happen, as you can see here, what happens when the land lease expires, theoretically land lease could come to the end of its term without renewal, and the building would revert to the leaseholder. It means that a co-op or condo owners would face eviction or could lose tenants in their homes. However, this is a rare situation. So essentially you would lose the building, you would lose your house if it doesn't get renewed. So if you're gonna get a leasehold land or property, you should really consider your age and does that carry you through to the end of your life? Because if there's only 30 years left and you're only 25 years old, you might have a real conundrum when you're 60 years old. These leasehold properties is what they just announced they want to make a lot more of. They already did an announcement like a couple weeks ago, maybe it was a month or two ago, about more co-op housing. It's all the same thing. This is not what we want in Canada. Everyone wants home ownership. And the majority of us don't want to be living in a condo box jammed in there. You know, that's the Trudeau Liberal government plan for the future here. They want people to have a 2-bedroom condo in some big city and be raising 2 kids in that. And that's ridiculous. And what's happening instead is nobody's raising kids. The birth rates are dropping off a cliff. People can't afford to have kids. People can't even afford to rent a place or buy a place, let alone have kids. This all stems to the immigration levels in Canada, aka Mark Miller, the schmuck we just watched. Just to round things out, as it wasn't really mentioned in that video, but the study permit holders in Canada we've got from 2000 to 2022, and you can see here just skyrocketing. So Harper, left power right here. Trudeau took over, and you can see an instant jump up here to 410, so 350 to 410, so an instant 60,000 more, and now we're up to 800,000. So he's doubled it since he took power. While the temporary foreign workers is the lesser amount, it's still 120,000. We've got 800,000 student permits, and then the immigration level is 500,000. It's way too many people. Our country can't support this. We've all known this for a long time, but they want to keep those real estate values high. Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it's because Trudeau's a real estate development company. And if you're wondering where all the immigrants are arriving to, we've got this one. This is from 2023, so the most recent data, and Ontario completely taking over the list here. So this is the 500,000 people coming in. And so we've got half of them almost in Ontario, and then the rest in basically British Columbia, Quebec, and Alberta takes up the majority of the lion's share. Jumping over to my group, let's see what memes we've got here today. Come on, do an alien invasion. Monkeypox is no fun. The beginning of the end of Canada, the end of Canada. Ugh. Too many Trudeaus. We need a new law in Canada that anyone with the last name of Trudeau is never allowed to hold any government position ever again. This is not normal. You know what's interesting about, these face coverings? While it's a religious thing over there in Canada, I remember when I was a kid, if anyone covered their face, they would get pulled over by the cops because they're bank robbers. That's the only people who would cover their face. Now, what do we do with this in society today? Do we allow that? Because if someone can cover their face, then they can easily commit crimes. That's why you see the protests in our streets. Everyone's got their face covered. You can just be anonymous among the crowd. Is that really fair in our society? I don't know. You guys let me know. It's an interesting thing to think about. Homes you can afford. Homes Canadians can afford after 9 years of Trudeau. This perfectly sums up Trudeau's Canada. Time's most hated man in the universe. There's a Jagmeat potato thing going around. It all stems from this clip, which is hilarious. I think I missed it the first time I watched it.
A sack of potatoes, 1 bag of potatoes.
What are you talking about?
A sack of potatoes, 1 bag of potatoes.
What are you talking about?
It's funny on the longer clip too, this guy's face changes. He's like, what did you say? Yeah, a sack of potatoes, Jagmeat. So we got a flyer in the mail here. I thought this was real just reading this. So you look at this, we can finally afford our dream pizza, fixed rate pizza. XL pizza plus 4 toppings, $17. Fixed rate pizza, folks. CBC News condensed Trudeau approved cream of bullcrap soup. Diversity is our strength. Jet, free house, free food, free luxury vacations, henchmen. Yes, he does. Today's math students are multiplying zeros. I'm doing the job of 3 men. How do you like them apples? Oh, Jagme, he just makes it too easy. Lighthouse in a desert, still more useful than Justin Trudeau. I think we're going to wrap it up on that one. Oh, look who we've got. We've got Boo here, waking up for the beauty shot here. So if you haven't noticed, I switched my camera over. I had a cinema camera sitting behind me there in the corner. We upgraded the camera quality here. What do you guys think is coming next for what Mark Miller alluded to with his big announcement? He has to run through his caucus and have a robust look at it. What is he actually talking about? What immigration changes is he making? Not just cosmetic. I didn't realize there was cosmetic immigration changes you could make. But apparently he's going to be doing something here. So I wonder what their next play is. They're desperate to do anything. They're now mimicking the Democrats, trying to get some sort of boost in popularity there. It's not working. Nothing's working for them. The question now is, what does Mark Miller have up his sleeve?